Prince William quietly ordered an inspection of Queen Camilla's private home. The team that carried out that order walked in expecting nothing unusual. What they discovered would shake the British monarchy to its core. What started as a standard review of royal property turned into one of the most unsettling findings in modern royal history. The investigators entered expecting order and precision. What they found instead raised questions that no palace statement or carefully crafted press release could ever fully address. Looking back, the warning signs were always present. Most people simply weren't paying close enough attention. From the outside, the villa appeared immaculate. The hedges were perfectly trimmed. The walls gleamed with fresh paint. The windows caught the morning light and held it still. Everything about the property suggested careful, deliberate order. The kind of order that takes years to create and moments to shatter. Charles paused at the gate. His hand rested on the iron, but he didn't push it open. "It's too quiet," he said softly. "A house should feel alive, even when empty." William stood beside him. "Perhaps she simply prefers solitude. She always has." Charles nodded, but the unease stayed with him. Inside, the villa matched its exterior. Polished floors. Grand windows. Furniture chosen with impeccable taste. A home maintained with extraordinary care. Yet beneath the beauty, something lingered. A stillness that felt less like peace and more like held breath. Then they reached the main sitting room. And everything changed. The wall before them was covered in photographs. At first glance, they seemed ordinary. Diana at public events. Diana at charity functions. Diana smiling, walking, waving. Images spanning decades. Charles stepped closer. Then he saw what had been done to them. Horns had been drawn across Diana's head in thick black marker. Words were written beneath the images in careful handwriting. Liar. Fraud. Traitor. Some photos had been circled repeatedly, pressed so hard that the paper had nearly torn. Newspaper clippings lined another section. But the headlines had been cut apart and reassembled. Strips of paper glued over the original words, reversing their meaning entirely. Charles's eyes moved to the center. A larger photograph hung there. Blurred. Taken from a distance. But instantly recognizable. The underpass in Paris. The crumpled wreckage. The darkness surrounding it. Below the image, written in red ink, were 7 words. Finally, she is out of the way. Charles's hands began to shake. "Who?" he asked quietly. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Who would do this?" William didn't answer. He stood frozen, his eyes moving from one image to the next, absorbing the scale of what surrounded them. The photos weren't random. They were arranged chronologically. A life tracked from beginning to end and beyond. This wasn't grief. This wasn't confusion. This was something built over years. In silence. Behind a locked door. This is where the story becomes truly disturbing. What drives someone to spend decades tracking every moment of another person's life? Documenting every appearance. Every smile. Every public moment. Psychologists call it comparative obsession. When someone is constantly measured against another person, especially someone they can never surpass, something inside them breaks. The comparison consumes them. The other person becomes an obsession. Not because of hatred, but because they cannot escape. Camila spent her entire life being compared to Diana. Diana was the fairy tale. The people's princess. The one the world adored. And Camila? She was the other woman. The one who waited in the shadows. The one never quite good enough. Every public moment of warmth toward Diana was a reminder of what Camila could never have. Not the title. Not the position. The love of the people. That kind of comparison doesn't just hurt. It destroys. It hollows you out until the only way to survive is to convince yourself that the other person was never worthy of the admiration they received. Camila didn't just hate Diana. She needed Diana to be a fraud. She needed the world to be wrong about her. Because if Diana was truly as wonderful as everyone believed, then what did that make Camila? The collection in that villa wasn't just about hatred. It was about survival. It was the only way she could live with herself. And that is the tragedy. The person Camila was trying to destroy had been gone for decades. But she could never let her go. Because letting go would mean facing the truth about herself. They moved deeper into the villa. The sitting room followed them. Its weight stayed with them. The library came next. Floor-to-ceiling shelves. Leather-bound volumes. The smell of ink and old paper. William noticed the desk. Scrapbooks stacked across its surface. He opened one carefully and felt the air shift around him. Every page held newspaper clippings about Diana. Features. Interviews. Candid photos. Obituaries. Each one cut with care and mounted flat. But none untouched. Margins filled with dense handwriting. Passages underlined, circled, crossed through. Words of admiration reframed as evidence of manipulation. Of performance. Of calculated deception. She went through every article, William said. Every single one. Charles said nothing. He was looking at the adjacent wall. A large map of Europe was mounted there, stretching from the British coast to the Mediterranean. Small pins marked dozens of locations, each connected by thin lines of thread. Beside each pin, a handwritten label noted a date, a city, sometimes a name. William stepped closer. The pins tracked movement. Not official engagements. Personal movement. Private trips. Visits to friends. Holidays taken far from cameras. This is not research, William said. His voice was steady, but barely. This is surveillance. She tracked every step Diana took for years. Even the private ones. In the study beyond the library, they found letters. Addressed to no one by name. Never signed. Never sent. But they had been written in the same careful handwriting. On paper that had yellowed at the edges from age. You cannot hide forever. The world will know your lies. Your smiles are for cameras. Everyone who looks closely enough can see through them. I have been watching. I have always been watching. Charles picked one up and read it in full. Then he set it back down, face down on the desk. He said nothing for a long moment. She was carrying this for a very long time, he finally said. William didn't answer. He was already standing in the doorway of the room beyond. The expression on his face told Charles everything before a single word was spoken. The bedroom was colder than the rest of the villa. The images here were denser. Pressed closer together. The handwriting smaller and more urgent. The chronology had collapsed. Photographs from different decades overlapped. Connected by arrows and annotations that looped across multiple images at once. It was in this room that the collection shifted from obsession into something without a clean name. And it was in this room that both men noticed for the first time. The door at the far end. The only door in the villa they had not yet opened. It was also the only one that was locked. The key was small. Found in the drawer of the bedside table. Underneath a silk cloth. Placed there as though intended to be overlooked. Charles held it for a moment. Then he crossed the bedroom and stopped in front of the locked door. William stood behind him. Saying nothing. The lock turned on the first attempt. The room beyond was unlike anything else in the villa. No photographs. No maps. No pinned clippings. No handwritten letters. The walls were bare. A single reading lamp sat on a narrow table. Beside a locked wooden cabinet. Inside the cabinet, stacked in neat order, were bound files. Not personal diaries. Official documents. Each bearing a formal royal crest. Each numbered in sequence. Each dated. William leaned forward and read the label on the first file. The dates ran from the mid-1990s through to the autumn of 1997. These are internal meeting minutes, William said slowly. From senior palace working groups. He paused. These should be held in the royal archive. They should not be here. Charles had already opened the first file. He was reading without speaking. Father, what does it say? Charles didn't answer immediately. He turned to the next page. Then the next. Then he set the file down and pressed both hands flat against the table. She was present, he said. Not officially. Not on record. But she was consulted. In the meetings that determined how Diana's public engagements were managed. The decisions around her media access. The restrictions placed on certain communications. His voice remained level, but only through visible effort. Camila provided counsel. Informally. Without any formal role. Without anyone outside that room being told. William felt the floor shift beneath him. She was not simply watching Diana, he said. She was advising the people who made decisions about Diana's life. For years, Charles said quietly. During the most difficult period Diana ever faced. Neither man spoke for a long moment. What had begun as an investigation into a disturbing private obsession had just become something of an entirely different order. The photos on the walls, the hatred, the surveillance, the 7 words in red ink had been shocking. But they had been private. Contained. The record of one woman's interior world. These documents were not private. They were institutional. Decisions that had shaped real events. Affected real lives. Altered the course of a story the entire world believed it already understood. Every year, without fail, Camila requested the same week. Not a different week depending on the season. The same week. Always. And always alone. This is my time, she would tell her aides. Her voice unhurried. Her tone leaving no room for negotiation. I will not be disturbed. The palace staff learned quickly not to question it. The calendar was cleared. Flights arranged. The villa prepared. By the time her car pulled through the gates, the property was exactly as she required. And every member of staff had been reminded that her privacy was absolute. No guests. No family. No exceptions. She prefers solitude, one longtime aide explained to a junior staff member. It is her way of resting. She wants no interruptions. That explanation satisfied people for years. It felt reasonable. Private enough not to pursue. But the staff who worked at the villa had learned a different kind of silence. One shaped not by instruction alone, but by atmosphere. There were rules at the property that didn't exist anywhere else. Nothing that happened inside was to be discussed outside. Personal observations were not to be recorded. Questions about what Camila did during her private hours were not to be asked. It felt like the villa had its own rules, one former staff member later confided. Separate from the palace. Separate from everything. Outside the walls, the visits had become a quiet fixture of public curiosity. Newspapers noted her arrivals and departures. Photographers captured her stepping from cars. Commentators remarked on the consistency. The same location. The same week. Year after year. She valued her solitude. She needed the rest. It was simply her way. What no one had considered, what no one had thought to examine in all those years, was what the solitude was actually for. Not what she rested from. But what she returned to. The files in the locked room told a story no one had expected. Camila had not simply been watching Diana from a distance. She had been influencing decisions about Diana's life from the inside. Meeting minutes. Internal palace working groups. Decisions about media access. Restrictions on communications. Camila was there. Not officially. But present. Consulted. Advising the people who made decisions about Diana's life. This is not research, Charles said. His voice remained even, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. This is something else entirely. And you know it. For the first time since she had walked through the door, Camila did not answer immediately. The villa, which had always been her space. Controlled. Private. Entirely on her terms. Had become somewhere she no longer recognized. When Camila arrived at the villa that afternoon, she walked in with her usual composure. She adjusted her scarf. She reached back into the car for a small bag. She turned toward the front entrance with the composed expression of a woman returning to something she considered entirely her own. She did not notice the second car parked to the side until she was already at the door. Inside, Charles and William were standing in the entrance hall. Not seated. Not occupied with anything. Simply standing. Facing the door. Waiting. Camila stopped. The smile on her face did not disappear immediately. It held for a moment. A fraction too long. Then something behind her eyes shifted. "Charles," she said. Then, "William. I wasn't expecting anyone here today." Neither of them spoke. She looked from one face to the other. Then she looked past them toward the sitting room. And something in her posture changed. A barely perceptible adjustment. A stillness that had not been there a moment before. "Something is wrong," she said quietly. Charles took a single step forward. "Camila. We need to speak." What followed did not begin as a confrontation. It began as a disclosure. Charles described what the audit had uncovered. The sitting room. The photographs. The handwriting. The map. The letters. The locked room. Camila listened without interrupting. Her hands remained still at her sides. Her face gave very little away. "You misunderstand what you saw," she said. William's jaw tightened. "We spent several hours inside this house. We saw every room. We read what was written on those walls. We opened the files. There is very little room for misunderstanding." "The presentation may appear extreme," Camila said. Her voice steady and careful. But the intention behind it was analytical. I needed to understand her. Her methods. Her impact. The narrative she constructed around herself. "You drew horns on her face," William said. The words landed and stayed. Camila held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked away. Not in guilt. But with the particular expression of someone who has decided that a certain line of conversation is not worth continuing. "The files in the locked room," Charles said. "The meeting minutes. Your involvement in decisions that were never disclosed. That is not research, Camila. That is something else entirely. And you know it." For the first time, Camila did not answer immediately. "I survived the only way I knew how," she finally said. Charles held her gaze. He said one more thing before he walked out. He said it softly. Without anger. And it was the truest thing spoken in that villa all day. The news broke before dawn. Charles saw it from across the room and did not move toward it immediately. He stood in the doorway of his private study, still wearing the same clothes he had worn to the villa. He looked at the newspaper from a distance. The way a person looks at something they already know is going to be difficult. Then he crossed the room, picked it up, and read the headline. Within the hour, every major broadcaster had broken from its regular schedule. Anchors sat before cameras and described in language that grew less restrained with each passing bulletin what sources were now confirming. The images themselves had not been broadcast in full. They did not need to be. The descriptions alone were enough. Social media had not waited for broadcast journalism. By the time the morning papers reached their second print run, the story had moved through every platform with the particular velocity that attaches itself to things people cannot quite believe are true. Liar. Fraud. Traitor. Alongside photographs of Diana taken at moments of obvious public warmth. The contrast required no commentary. People provided it anyway. Opinion polling returned numbers that silenced the room when they were read aloud. Nearly two-thirds of respondents described Camila's behavior as beyond acceptable explanation. More than three-quarters believed the royal family was obligated to make a formal public response. International outlets had picked up the story by early afternoon. Correspondents in Paris noted the particular weight of the crash photograph. Commentators in other capitals questioned the stability of an institution that could contain something of this nature for so many years without detection. There is no established framework for this, one historian said plainly. Because nothing quite like this has happened before. William watched the coverage from a room with the sound turned low. He stood rather than Saturday. Arms at his sides. He said nothing for a long time. Then he turned away from the screen entirely. A charitable engagement had been scheduled for months. Invitations sent. Program printed. Guest list confirmed. No mechanism existed to cancel it. The palace had said nothing publicly about Camila's attendance. The omission itself was noticed. The cars arrived in sequence. Charles stepped out first. His expression composed. His posture carrying the particular uprightness of a man who had decided in advance that this evening would be navigated without visible concession to the weight of the days preceding it. William and Catherine arrived shortly after. Inside, the seating had been arranged as it always was. Name cards at designated places. Camila's card was there. Her chair sat in its designated place. It remained empty for the duration of the evening. No announcement was made. No explanation was offered. The assembled guests understood collectively and without being told that explanation was not going to come. Conversation continued. The program proceeded. Glasses were raised at the appropriate moments. The business of the evening was conducted with the surface orderliness these occasions are designed to produce. But the cameras found the empty chair. It appeared in footage for no longer than a handful of seconds at a time. A cutaway from a speaker. A wide shot that included in its lower corner the unoccupied seat beside Charles. Charles did not look at the empty chair during the evening. Not once. When the evening ended, the guests filed out. The room emptied gradually. Chairs scraping softly against the floor. Voices dropping to murmurs. Camila's chair remained where it was. The lights went down around it. But the chair told only half the story. The villa was closed within the week. A small team arrived on a Tuesday morning. Security personnel. Legal representatives. Senior administrative staff. They worked through the property methodically. The files were removed first. Catalogued. Transferred into royal legal custody. The contents of the other rooms were documented and sealed. The locks were changed. By the time the last car pulled away, the villa looked exactly as it always had. Camila's withdrawal from public life was not announced. It did not need to be. Her absence from scheduled engagements was noted with a kind of restrained language that has learned over many years to say a great deal by saying very little. Appearances that had been confirmed were quietly removed from the official calendar. Her office issued no statement. The palace issued no statement. The silence was total. And to those who understood how these things worked, entirely deliberate. Inside the institution, adjustments were made. Quietly. In scheduling. In the allocation of certain responsibilities. In the redistribution of roles. Charles was seen less frequently in the weeks that followed. Those who observed him closely described something difficult to name. Not grief. Not anger. A kind of settled exhaustion. William did not speak publicly about what had been found. He did not reference it in any appearance. Any interview. But those who attended a private Diana memorial event held weeks later noted that he stood in front of her portrait for longer than was usual. Longer than protocol required. Longer than anyone around him stood. He said nothing. He simply looked. Diana herself, of course, was absent from everything that followed. She had been absent for a very long time. And yet she had been present in a sense that none of them had fully understood. Inside every room of a villa that her name had filled for more years than anyone had known to count, this is not really a story about a villa. Or photographs. Or the obsession that filled every room. This is a story about comparison. About what happens when a person is measured against someone they can never surpass. Psychologists call it comparative obsession. When you cannot escape the shadow of another person, you don't just resent them. You need them to be unworthy. Because if they are as good as everyone believes, then what does that make you? Camila's villa wasn't just about hatred. It was about survival. It was the only way she could live with herself. But here is the tragedy. The person she was trying to destroy had been gone for decades. And yet she was still there. In every room. In every image. In every carefully preserved clipping. Because the obsession wasn't about Diana. It was about Camila. About a woman who could never escape the comparison. Who could never be enough. And so she built a monument to her own inability to let go. What happened in that villa was not just a personal failing. It was a window into something darker. What happens when a person allows resentment to consume them? When they cannot forgive someone for being what they could never be. Diana died long ago. But in that villa, she was never allowed to rest. And now, finally, the world knows why. Subscribe to the Meghan Markle Report for more royal investigations. Drop your thoughts below. Was this about hate or something deeper? I read every single comment. See you in the next one.